All right, back on the Young Turks. Jenkins, RJ with you. We're having a little trouble reaching Representative Maloney because she's abroad. We'll see if we can get that for you later in the program. Meanwhile, news about other members of Congress. Al Franken has now taken the lead in the state of Minnesota. For the first time since counting and recounting began, Franken takes the lead over Norm Coleman in Minnesota. Honestly, I've been skeptical all along that Franken was going to pull it out, whether it was before the election or after the election. But now it looks like for the first time Franken's taking the lead, and the people are saying that he is not likely to relinquish it given the ballots left to be counted. So they know what those ballots are, they know who they're more likely to go to, and apparently it's Al Franken. He closed all of Coleman's lead with the latest rulings in Minnesota, and there were a couple of court rulings in his favor saying, and it's only in his favor because they said actually count as many of the votes as you possibly can. Not ones that people have dispute over or that they can't tell who they voted for. Of course you can't count those. But the ones that are clear, you should count, which is the most obvious ruling in the history of the world, if you ask me. And when you count those, Franken takes the lead. And so now it looks really bleak for Norm Coleman. Can he pull it out? I suppose. I mean, I suppose you can go back and forth. But Norm Coleman asked for certain ballots to be counted because he thought it was going to be in his favor. And RJ, that wound up even hurting him, and Franken picked up more votes there.
Yeah, I think, and psychologically, once the lead flips, there's no more legal maneuvering he can do to try to uncount the votes that have been counted, which is what happened in the 2000 election. Really, no one's going to tolerate that now. So unless there's a cache of Norm Coleman votes sitting around, which is highly unlikely, it actually looks pretty good for Al.
Now, that's a great point made by RJ, because before, when he tried to Florida maneuver. He went to court and said, stop the count, stop the count. We have to stop it right away because otherwise I'm not going to win. And he said it'll be do constitutional damage, la, 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 la. Basically, he knew he was going to start to trail. But now that he's trailing, he doesn't have that argument anymore, stop the count. Right. Because then if he stops the count, he loses. And he doesn't really, as far as PR is concerned, and that's what RJ was alluding to as well, you know, it's harder to say I have the moral upper hand when you're losing.
Right.
So he's lost all of his advantages, and so he looks to be in a bad spot. But you never know; it's not over. Maybe they count some ballots, and it turns out Norm Coleman takes the lead by it could be a tiny amount. It could be one or two people. If at the final count, whoever is up by however many votes, they're going to have, well, not only an enormous advantage, but they will very, very likely be declared the winner. And it'll be very hard to reverse. And, you know, there is a scenario here where it literally could come down to one vote.
Theoretically, it could.
It could. Now, it probably won't. It probably won't because that's very, unlikely in any election. But part of the reason I say that is because I saw a news story where they said they found the one ballot that finally put Franken over the top. A man I think it was in Rochester, Minnesota, if I've got that right, had circled Franken but gone a little too much. And circled like half of the guy next to him, like over exuberantly, like Franken.
Excited about Al, yeah. Feel the Al magic.
And they're like, well, that's the one ballot that put Franken over the top. We'll see if it lasts. But but it's cool that every vote counts in Minnesota so far, and that it's going to make a difference. All right, now there's another politician whose fate is up in the air. That's our old friend Rod Blagojevich in Illinois. Now, you know, the evidence against him is pretty damning, but he's not going away, and he's not convinced. Unsurprising. He did a press conference today, and this thing is precious. That's about 3 minutes. It has so many different fun parts. We're just going to run the whole 3 minutes for you, and then we'll break it down afterwards. Here's the governor of Illinois, Dennis the Menace.
Thank you very much. I'm here to tell you right off the bat that I am not guilty of any criminal wrongdoing, that I intend to stay on the job, and I will fight this thing every step of the way. I will fight, I will fight, I will fight until I take my last breath. I have done nothing wrong. And I'm not going to quit a job the people hired me to do because of false accusations and a political lynch mob. Now that's what I'm going to do. Let me tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to do what my accusers and political enemies have been doing. and that is talk about this case in 30-second sound bites on Meet the Press or on the TV news. Now, I'm dying to answer these charges. I am dying to show you.
We're going to find out how much Blagojevich is dying to answer those charges in a little bit. We'll come back to that clip, actually, because Representative Carolyn Maloney is now on the line with us. Representative Maloney, thank you so much.
Cenk. Hi, Cenk and RJ. How are you?
We're great. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
No, we really appreciate it. We had some good news for consumers today.
By the way, where are you, Representative?
I'm here to talk about credit card reform. Would you like to talk about credit card reform or not?
Sure. All right. I was just curious.
You bet.
All right. What's the good news you have for us?
Well, the Federal Reserve today released its final rule, and it banned certain unfair or deceptive practices related to credit cards. This is really good news for American consumers. We've been working for years to bring them the protection they need, and I'm delighted to see that the regulators have taken substantive action. And finally, these practices have been declared for what they are, unfair and deceptive.
So what were those practices?
The good news is that we have them, but the bad news is they're not putting them into effect until 2010.
So wait, first let's understand what those practices are, because credit cards do a lot of deceptive practices. What are the ones that this piece of legislation deals with?
Well, I think the worst is the any time, any reason rate increases. And they have in these contracts. The contracts used to be a page long. Now they're more than 30 pages long, and they're often filled with traps and fine print that only a credit card executive could understand. And they've been crossing the line and pushing too many cardholders into debt. It balances the field. It levels the playing field between cardholders and card companies, provides notice if they plan to increase your interest rate, and allows 45 days to pay off your bill and go to a different company if you would like. It bans the very deceptive practices such as charging interest on a balance that has already been paid, charging retroactively on the balance. When you have two balances, one that was at a lower rate and one at a higher rate, forcing you to pay off the lower rate first allows you to pay off both at the same time. Many ways that they can't lie in it. They can't say that a rate is there for lifetime and then change it. And then one of the worst, all the time they raise the rates because of activities that are totally unrelated to the card. For example, I had one constituent who was 1 day late on her utility bill, and they raised her rate up to 30%. These types of practices are banned and brought into line.
So what I'm curious about is there a cap on percentages, either in this legislation or in anything else? Because there used to be those old loan sharking laws where you couldn't, charge interest at a certain percentage. I wonder whatever happened to those. Do we have any laws on this?
They're not in effect now. What this bill does, it doesn't set a limit because it would have been even harder in a free market system to pass that in Congress. I did pass a bill in the last Congress. It went through the House of Representatives. It did not pass the Senate. And the federal rule in many ways resembles the bill that I put forward. It got 312 votes, including over 80 Republican votes. And I will be reintroducing it in the next Congress. As you know, President-elect Obama campaigned on credit card reform and is a supporter of this bill. So I'm hopeful that in the new Congress it will pass quickly and give consumers the protections they need.
Do either the new regulations or the new bill do anything to require clarification on statements that cardholders receive that can be very confusing and hard to follow in terms of the rate?
There's a whole area on clarity and notice and making it readable so people can understand it. It had gotten to the point where it was so confusing that no one could even understand their bills. So notice and clarity are part of it, but the Federal Reserve has said earlier that you needed more protection than just notice and clarity and clear forms. So it literally bans some of the most deceptive practices.
We're talking to Representative Carolyn Maloney from New York. Congresswoman, you mentioned 2010 as to when something would get put into effect. I was confused by that. What was that about?
The Federal Reserve came out with the rule, but the rule does not go into effect until 2010. The good news is that they have the rule banning many of these unfair practices. The bad news is that it doesn't go into effect until 2010. So I intend to reintroduce my bill in the next Congress, and hopefully it will pass quickly so that consumers get the protection they deserve. We've done so much to help Wall Street. Now it's time to help Main Street and give them some relief from the credit crunch.
Go ahead.
Well, you raise a great point, because we have a couple of things going on. We've put in enormous amounts of money to help Wall Street, presumably to ease credit and access to credit, yet consumers don't appear to be feeling any of that. We have the money rate set by the Fed effectively down to zero, yet so is it certain that some sort of, not rate control, but perhaps tying interest rates to the Fed or some other move is off the table for now?
Well, the way you can protect consumers is through a Federal Reserve rule, which they've come out with, and I applaud that action. That's good news. The bad news is that it doesn't take effect until 2010. So the way to get the protections before the consumers quickly is to pass a law. That is what I'm working on doing. I passed it through the House in the last Congress. It did not pass the Senate, but the President-elect Obama campaigned on credit card reform. It was one of the items that he spoke about on the campaign trail, and he said that Americans aren't falling into debt because they've made an irresponsible decision. They're falling into debt because credit card companies are pushing them over the edge.
But if I understood...
Too long, credit card companies have been using unfair and deceptive practices to trick Americans into signing agreements they can't afford. This rule and my legislation would stop that, and with the support of President-elect Obama and Speaker Pelosi and Dodd in the Senate, I'm hopeful we can pass it in the next Congress.
We're talking to United States Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. Representative Maloney, what is the relationship of the financial bailout and the $700 billion to the credit card companies? Is some of that money going to the credit card companies?
A lot of the people that are receiving the money are financial institutions, many of whom issue credit cards. And so there is a connection in that it is going to companies or financial institutions. The purpose of the Turks program or the bailout was to stabilize our financial institutions. As you know, we had some of our largest banks fail, Washington Mutual, Wachovia. Many merged. I know at the beginning of one weekend I had 4 investment banks in New York City. By the end of the weekend, there wasn't one left. So our financial markets have been in the worst challenging situation that they've been in since the Great Depression in 1929. There was a real concern that we would lose the commercial banking system of our country. So the money was put into financial institutions to stabilize them. Hank Paulson came to Congress with 3 pages. We turned it into 106 pages that required taxpayer protections, an oversight board, an IG, accountability, transparency. But still, we are working to get better results. We have stabilized our markets, but the second phase, that of getting credit into the streets, to the small businesses, to buy supplies, to keep their payroll going, we're still not getting credit out into the markets, and that's something we have to continue working on.
Well, that leads to a very important question. Hank Paulson today said that he wants to release the second part of that bailout, the second $350 billion. Are you inclined to do that or not do that?
Well, the way the legislation is set up is that originally Congress wanted to give this administration $350 billion. And the next administration, President-elect Obama, the next $350 billion. We are almost there. Personally, I don't think they should be able to get it. But the way the legislation was set up is they could spend it, but then Congress would have to come in and vote to rescind it or to veto it. When we left for break, although I serve on the Financial Services Committee, we haven't had much of a break. We've been having hearings every single week on the auto industry, the TARP, AIG, all the financial institutions. I am inclined to believe that this Congress will want the President-elect Obama to be in charge of the second $350 billion. There was additional money left over from the first $350 billion, and that was part of that was spent on the auto bailout, as you know, that the President initiated this week. It was similar to legislation we passed in the House, but it did not pass the Senate, to provide a bridge loan to the auto industry to save jobs and manufacturing base in our country. Economists estimate that there may be as many as 3 million jobs either directly or indirectly associated with the auto industry, and that losing those jobs in this downturn in our economy would be a very heavy blow, and most economists have supported the President's actions today for a bridge loan to the auto industry.
Representative Maloney, last question for you. The administration said that they would impose a lot of oversight over this money, but the $350 billion has been spent with very little oversight. Washington Post had a huge story about how oversight has really not taken place at all in the 4 different places that it was supposed to. And plus, they said they'd limit executive compensation, but there's a giant loophole in executive compensation limitation, so that has not been limited at all either. Do you feel deceived at all by the administration on this?
Well, certainly, when people or companies are taking taxpayers' funds, they should not be giving dividends. They should not be giving bonuses. They should not be rewarding executives that basically mismanage their companies. So I do believe that there have been loopholes on it. I personally am opposed to giving them this $350 billion. I trust the Obama team more, and I believe it would be better managed in a way that protects the taxpayer, protects the economy. Some firms are giving bonuses and so forth and so on. We had one hearing on AIG. This was an outrage on AIG, and they're taking taxpayer money, and they had a, quote, retreat where they had spas and this, that, and the other, and I mean, it was an outrage, an absolute outrage. So I'm opposed to giving this administration any more money.
All right,
Quite frankly, I can't wait until President Obama takes over. I can't wait, and I think this country can't wait. That's why he has been so active. He is talking about proposals that he wants to pass on day one, January 20th, and I support him completely.
All right. United States Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney from the 14th District of New York, thank you so much for joining us on the Young Turks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, we'll be right back.